to follow the Ave Maria, Monsignor.
Yes.
That's pretty tough on me, but I'm going to get through it.
Thank you.
Welcome. Today we celebrate the life of a great man. My father, Joseph Angelo Lucia, or Papa Joe, as many of you knew him. I want to thank all of you for coming today and paying your respects and for saying so long. You see, my father never said goodbye. He'd get angry, and he would say, "Don't say goodbye. Never say goodbye. Just say so long." In Italian, we say, "Ci vediamo," which means, "I'll see you again." Papa Joe was a champion. In everything that he did. And he taught us to be champions. So whether you played football for him, or you worked with him, or you're a son or daughter, we all became champions because of Papa Joe. He inspired us all to do better and to want more. I was with him to the very end as he fought for his next breath. I held his hand and I prayed the rosary. And I just knew that this was his time. And so I could stand here and tell you all about how my dad died, but I'd rather tell you about how he lived. At the age of 17, he lied so that he could join the military. And he joined the Navy, where he would spend the next 26 years of his life. He fought for our country in 3 different wars. And it was during this experience in the military that would shape the foundation of the man that we had all come to know as Papa Joe. He met my mother, Rita, when she was just 15 years old. Sound familiar, Ray? And he said to her, "We're going to get married as soon as I get out of the military." Well, my dad had no intention of getting out of the Navy, but he had every intention of marrying my mother. And they were married at a very young age. I think my mom was 16 or 17. They had 5 children: Joseph, Raymond, Sandra, and Christine, which she's Tina, and me, Michael. It seemed that every time that Dad would get leave from the ship and come home, another child would show up. Go figure. He finally retired Master Chief of the United States Navy, or as he always liked to correct me, that's Command Master Chief, son. And he took his Navy days very serious. Along the way, he became a champion in judo, which would also shape the foundation of his mental and physical toughness. I once saw Dr. Staub pull a tooth with no anesthesia. No kidding. Just pull it, Doc. And he ripped it right out of his jaw. He was a tough man, my father. But he knew that nothing of value would ever come without sacrifice and without hard work. He believed that winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. He once said that losing was like kissing your sister. No offense, I love my sisters dearly. But it worked. We won a lot of games.
Oh, that's good.
Some of those other guys must have had ugly sisters. Not me. I love you. I love you. He taught us how to be mentally and physically tough. But his mantra, like Monsignor stole a little bit of my thunder, his mantra was faith, family, and love for others. Although I'm sure many of you would argue it was, in fact, faith, family, and football. Because he loved football. He coached football for 40 years at all different levels, Pop Warner, high school, college. He even coached the cops in the Copper Bowl. That's where the sheriffs play the police, and they beat the heck out of each other. They don't do it anymore because there were too many police officers getting hurt. But it reminds me of a story that I'm sure David Umperville will remember. He was on his way to football practice, and he got pulled over right on Twin Peaks Road by a sheriff. And as the sheriff was writing the ticket to my father, he had his back towards the stop sign, and up came a few of his athletes, and they saw what was going on, and they immediately started to pull the stop sign out of the ground and threw it in the brow ditch. Well, my dad's tune changed quite significantly, and so he started to argue the validity of that ticket. And he said, I don't see any stop sign. And the police officer said, it was right there. So, nevertheless, he got out of the ticket and went right to confession on Sunday. My father would always compliment people. He'd say, you're gorgeously beautiful. He'd also go to one of the servers and say, excuse me, ma'am, could you put your finger in my drink? It's just not quite sweet enough. I think he believed that it was easier to be kind to people and to lift them up than to be angry or mean. I think that he knew that by complimenting others and improving their lives somehow, that he was actually creating blessings for himself and for his family. But the one thing on which I know all of us can agree, the world will never fill the void from the loss of a true champion, a legend in the minds of so many. He shaped the minds and hearts of many young athletes and, in fact, changed the course of their lives. Many of you are here today. I'm so blessed to have had the privilege of being your son, Papa Joe. And our memories of you will live for generations to come. I hope that I can be 1/10 the man that you were. I pray that I can be the father to my children that you were to us. May you rest in peace and live in paradise with our mother Rita. She's waiting for you, Pop. I love you.
I'm Al Lucia, my Uncle Joe's nephew, and I'd like to draw a parallel between my Uncle Joe and my father, who some of you knew. My father was a very gentle man. My Uncle Joe, not so much. As wonderful as he was. I'd like to tell you a very brief story. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I visited he and my Aunt Rita in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and there was a kid in the neighborhood he didn't like very much, and so he wanted to teach me to box. He got some gloves and taught me to box, and I boxed this kid. And for the next 40 years or so, every time I visited here, he would say to me, pardon me, Monsignor, remember when we beat the crap out of that kid? My Uncle Joe, like my dad, was strong, but never a jerk. And that strength is something that, excuse me, we picked up all the way down the line. And so I want you to know, and when you do, he could tell a great story. We'll miss that. And we'll miss him.
Good morning, I'm Rich Lucia. Joe Lucia was my godfather, or I called him Uncle Joe. And I'm proud to be here today because, Monsignor, you're right, this is a celebration. And I want to go back to 1956. I was being confirmed, and he was my godfather. And we stepped outside the church, and what generally happens, I know it's a little strange for people here in San Diego, but this phenomenon called snow filled the air in South Philadelphia where we lived. And the snow was a little over 2 feet tall. Now, I was short and the snow was tall. So moving and going forward was a very tough process in that. But my Uncle Joe lifted me up and put me on his shoulders. And we proceeded to make the 4-block walk back to our house. Little did I know then, at 10 years old, that over the next 60 years, he'd be lifting me up again and again. Throughout my life, I've had turmoil, stress, and some things that were challenging. But he was always there to lift me up. And that's the kind of person he was. And it started with that walk back from church, when he turned around and he said, I want to tell you a story. And he told me a story that when he was in the Navy, he was in a submarine and they were out at sea. When all of a sudden, there was an enemy ship. Not an enemy ship, many enemy ships. So the captain called for a deep dive. And they dove down and they rested that submarine on the bottom of the ocean. And the word came out from the captain, not a sound. Don't make a sound, because if detected, it would be surely the end of everyone. And I said, Uncle Joe, how long were you down there? And he says, it was over 16 hours. I said, 16 hours? What did you do for 16 hours? And he said, I prayed. Now, there's a saying that people who pray in troubled waters sometimes forget to pray in calmer seas. Not Joe Lucia. He continued to pray for the rest of his life, the rosary, every morning. But here he was, a young man praying to God on the bottom of the ocean, and God heard him and said, not yet. You are a man with many gifts, and you have to use those gifts and touch many people. And he went on and did just that. Now, if I could just have a show of hands of anyone in this room, in this church, who has been touched by Joe Lucia, please raise your hand. Please take a look around. Joe Lucia is in heaven, but he's not gone. He'll live in all of us forever. God bless you all.
Now, those talks deserve some applause, don't you think?